On Christmas Eve, when the city glowed with lights meant to promise joy and belonging, Ethan Blackwood felt more alone than he ever had in his 52 years of life. He was a billionaire, a name whispered in boardrooms and printed in business magazines, a man who owned penthouses, private jets, and companies that employed tens of thousands, but none of that mattered as he sat alone in the back booth of a modest roadside diner, his expensive coat folded neatly beside him, untouched coffee calling in front of him. Just hours earlier, he had stood in the vast silence of his mansion, surrounded by decorations his staff had put up out of habit, not love. The tree sparkled, the fireplace crackled, but there was no laughter, no small footsteps, no voice calling him, Dad. His wife had died years ago, and his only son had spoken to him since a bitter argument that ended with slammed doors and words Ethan could never take back. That night, unable to breathe under the weight of regret, he had driven aimlessly until hunger and exhaustion led him to this diner, a place far removed from luxury and power. As he sat there, invisible among ordinary people, his attention was drawn to a young woman a few tables away. She wore a thin, worn coat with frayed edges, clearly not meant for the cold December night, and her hands trembled slightly as she spread a few coins across the table. Her face was pale and tired, eyes clouded with worry, yet gentle. Beside her sat a little girl, no more than 6, with blonde hair pulled back clumsily and eyes full of trust as she looked up at her mother. The child spoke softly, and the woman forced a smile, nodding as if everything were fine. Ethan watched as the waitress approached, cheerful but tired, and the woman hesitated before ordering the cheapest meal on the menu, asking if she could split it into 2 plates. The waitress agreed kindly, but Ethan saw the humiliation flicker across the woman's face. Then something happened that pierced straight through his carefully guarded heart. Before the food arrived, the woman pushed the coins back into her coat pocket and reached into her bag, pulling out a small, slightly crushed chocolate bar. She broke it in half, handing the larger piece to her daughter. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing the girl's hair back. "It's not much, but it's ours." The little girl smiled like she'd been given the world. "It's perfect, Mommy," she said, hugging her mother with a joy so pure it made Ethan's chest ache. In that moment, time seemed to slow. Ethan, who had spent his life chasing profits, acquisitions, and dominance, felt something inside him crack. He realized he couldn't remember the last time anyone had looked at him with that kind of unconditional love. The food arrived, and the mother carefully divided it, giving her daughter more than herself, pretending she wasn't hungry. When the girl insisted, the mother shook her head gently, saying she'd eaten earlier. Ethan knew that lie well. He'd told it to his son years ago when work had mattered more than dinner. Memories flooded him, missed birthdays, cancelled holidays, promises broken for just one more deal. He thought of his son alone somewhere, maybe angry, maybe hurting, maybe wishing his father had chosen differently. The mother and daughter laughed quietly over something small, perhaps a silly joke, and Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. He excused himself, walking to the counter, and paid for their meal, then more, far more, asking the waitress to say it was from Santa. When he returned to his booth, he watched the waitress tell the woman. The young mother's eyes widened, filling with tears she tried desperately to hide. She hugged her daughter tighter, whispering thank yous into her hair, not knowing who to thank but grateful beyond words. That should have been enough. It would have been enough for the old Ethan. But something had shifted. He stood, walked over, and gently asked if he could join them for a moment. The woman hesitated, protective but polite. He introduced himself simply as Ethan. They talked, really talked. She told him her name was Clara, that her husband had died 2 years earlier, that she worked 2 jobs and still struggled, that Christmas wasn't about gifts this year but about keeping her daughter warm and hopeful. The little girl talked about wanting to be a teacher someday, about loving Christmas lights because they make the dark less scary. Each word felt like a lesson Ethan had never learned despite all his success. When it was time to leave, Ethan did something he hadn't done in decades. He asked for forgiveness from himself. He slipped Clara his card, not as a billionaire offering charity, but as a man offering help and connection. "If you ever need anything," he said quietly, "call me." As he stepped back into the cold night, the city lights no longer felt mocking. For the first time in years, they felt like an invitation to change, to heal, to choose people over power. That Christmas didn't magically fix his life, but it started something far more valuable: reconciliation with his son, purpose beyond wealth, and a promise to never again be too busy to care. And if this story touched your heart even a little, if you believe that kindness can still change lives and that it's never too late to become better, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Because stories like these aren't just stories, they're reminders that humanity, compassion, and love are the greatest riches we can ever have. Christmas morning arrived quietly for Ethan Blackwood, without the usual fanfare of assistants, schedules, or congratulatory messages from executives around the world. For the first time in decades, his phone was silent by choice. He sat alone at the long dining table in his mansion, staring at a cup of coffee growing cold, the events of the night before replaying in his mind with unsettling clarity, the tired eyes of Clara, the warm MTH in her daughter's smile, the way a single act of love had carried more meaning than all the gifts he had ever purchased. Something inside him refused to let the moment remain just a memory. Acting on an impulse he would once have dismissed as sentimental weakness, Ethan picked up his phone and dialed a number he had avoided for years: his son, Siglo. The line rang longer than expected, each second tightening his chest, until a guarded voice answered. There was silence, then confusion, then anger, but Ethan didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself. He listened, truly listened. He apologized without conditions, without excuses, admitting that he had failed as a father, that success had blinded him, and that he wanted, no, needed, a chance to do better, even if forgiveness never came. The call ended without resolution, but something fragile yet real had begun. Later that day, unable to sit still, Ethan returned to the diner. It felt foolish, almost desperate, yet necessary. He learned from the waitress that Clara and her daughter often came in after her late shift, counting every dollar. That afternoon, instead of offering money, Ethan did something unexpected: he offered opportunity. He arranged childcare support, flexible work at one of his companies, education assistance, and most importantly, dignity. Clara resisted at first, pride and fear battling hope, but when Ethan spoke honestly, not as a billionaire, but as a broken father who had learned too late, she agreed. Weeks passed, and changes rippled outward. Clara found stability, her daughter laughter that no longer carried hunger. Beneath it, Ethan found himself attending school plays, helping with homework, rediscovering the simple joy of presence. Then one snowy evening, his son appeared at his door unannounced. The reunion was a WK-word, raw, and imperfect, but real. They talked until dawn, rebuilding piece by piece what wealth had once destroyed. Ethan realized then that what he witnessed that Christmas night wasn't just a poor mother's sacrifice, it was a mirror reflecting everything he had lost and everything he could still save. And as his life transformed, so did his purpose. To use his power not to dominate, but to uplift, not to accumulate, but to connect. If this chapter of redemption, forgiveness, and second chances moved you, don't walk away without becoming part of this growing family. Subscribe to the channel, because the next story might be the one that changes your perspective, just like this Christmas changed Ethan's forever.